All right, and I'm going to just mute a few people so that we can all hear the presenter as clearly as possible. Thanks everyone for coming to our second roundtable gathering. I hope everyone has had a good couple of weeks starting your farm planning and reading and learning more. So tonight we are going to hear some more about the business side of farming, and we're going to hear from Jacob Penny about some financial planning best practices, which are really, really important when you're starting up your own business. So with that, I will hand it over to him. I think, Jacob, are you able to share your screen?
I am. Let's see if it works real quick. Did that do it?
That did it. Yep, that looks great.
Perfect. Perfect. Those guys look like they're having fun, don't they?
Well, yeah.
I hope everyone's doing great tonight.
Just one more thing, Jacob, before you get started. Yeah. I think what we found works best for questions is just to either put them in the chat or and then we'll have time to ask them at the end. Just for, yeah, seems to work.
That works.
Okay, thank you.
What kind of timeline do we have tonight?
So we have until 8. Last week we kind of did like presentation for the first 45 minutes or so. I'm not sure, we don't need to take the whole time till 8. So
okay. Well, we'll try to be as relevant as possible. I know it's late in the evening for most everyone, so just so you guys are aware, I am a bit ADHD, so I may go off script tonight. I'll try to be as composed as possible. But essentially tonight, what I wanted to do was really just take a deep dive on financial planning and hit it at more of a surface level to start. What are some things we should be considering? What are some things we need to be thinking about moving forward as we grow our farms, our businesses? But first, a little background on me. My name is Jacob Penny. I am a financial advisor with Northwestern Mutual. I've been with the firm since 2016. It's not very long, I guess, but it feels like forever. A lot of our work is done with businesses all over the country. We've had the privilege to work with a lot of really great people, and I've learned a lot in my 6 years, and I'm excited to share a little bit about that with you guys tonight. Again, we're going to hit a bit of a surface level, so if there's deeper questions or if anyone wants to dive deeper beyond this, I'm happy to schedule time separately and help how I can. But as we talk about financial planning, again, I'll start to flip through these slides. I'll skip over some of them. Again, the ADHD plus some of these are a little bit of fluff. We'll try to keep it relevant and quick and get you guys onto your nights. First and foremost, it's helpful to think about what financial security means to you as an individual, your own individual, right? What do we want? What are we shooting for? It's most important to have a goal, right? If we don't have a goal, we don't have a finish line, we don't have a goalpost, we don't know what we're shooting for. So that's the biggest thing. And a lot of times when we sit down with clients, that's the very first conversation we have. It doesn't matter if they're business owners or if they're just an individual who's an employee for some local firm or something like that. We have to know where we're going. So part of what we want to do is get a handle on what makes you feel like you're making progress. All right, that's really the first thing. Okay, if we feel like we're making progress, then we've kind of checked a box to say, all right, well, I'm making progress now. I feel like you can tell me how I stack up to industry standards and things of this sort. So most of the time when I talk to people, and I don't know how many folks on this call have an advisor, most people don't. A lot of folks will lean on the person that, if they are employed, the person that manages their 401k. But a lot of people, as you see this stat right here, 32% of people actually have a financial advisor or financial planner. That's a small population of people. Um, 70% of people say that their planning needs improvement, and seeing 15 to 20 people a week, I can vouch for that. Right? A lot of people have a lot of work to do, but the first step is meeting with someone like myself and opening up and saying, this is what I've done, this is what I feel like I'm doing right. Tell me what I could do better. And you don't know what you don't know, right? So that's what we're here for. Let's see. Everyone kind of starts at their own point. Everyone has different goals, right? So I'll pick on Melissa, Jeffrey, and Ashley because those are the first three names that I see. You guys are probably all trying to accomplish different things, right? You're not, each of you are trying to build the same kind of farm or the same kind of lifestyle, right? So first and foremost, what's our goal? Where are we going for? Right? We're going to build a plan. We're going to talk about what is it going to take for you to get from point A to point B. And then we can talk about point C. Point C is irrelevant. We'll get from A to B first. Okay. Everyone's unique. Everyone thinks differently. Our goal is not to say, hey, I don't really like the way you think, right? I'm going to leave my thought processes at the door. Okay. I want to learn from you. I want to see what we can do to be relevant and how we can learn from each other. Over time, the plans that we make evolve, right? There may be a plan to pass the farm on to children. There may be a plan to sell the farm and move far, far away, right? You might have had enough. So every time I sit down with someone, we tend to do at least one review a year. And we're talking about what's different. How can we update your personal plan? If everybody's financial plan was this stagnant number, it would be pretty boring. My job would not be that fun. But what we learn is every time I sit down with someone year over year, things change. Incomes change, what they're trying to build has changed, the model, the partnerships, whatever it may be. So we need to make sure that as you evolve, your plan evolves with you. As far as creating a plan, there's typically three major components that we look at. First and foremost, in every single financial planning class I've ever taken from college to working through designations, if you think about it as a pyramid, the foundation of your financial plan starts with risk management. Okay, and that's, if you want to use a sports analogy, that's the defensive side of financial planning. So it's benefits and insurance planning. It is building up your emergency fund, debt reduction. That's where it starts, right? If we have cash on hand, we feel a lot better about where we're going. And second is really what everyone thinks about when they think about financial planners. Where are we investing our money? Our job is to go a bit deeper than that. We're not just looking at what are we investing in, we're looking at how are we investing in? How are we being as strategic as possible from a tax perspective? How are we not shooting ourselves in the foot for future use of these funds? These are big pieces. Third and final part is the distribution of the wealth that we're building. Okay, so one of the big things that we see, especially with self-employed folks, is how do I get to the money that I've built, right? Not all of the money that we're saving is for retirement. You may want to look to make sure that kids' education is taken care of. How do we make sure that's part of what we're doing? How do we have an operating account that's not just several $1,000s sitting in a savings account earning 0.02%, right? These are all things, but when we go to get that money out, we want to avoid tax drag, which is Uncle Sam saying, hey, of that money that you're trying to take out, I'm going to take a portion of it because it's my right. And it kind of is. We're all tax-paying citizens of the US, and I'm sure we all pay our fair share. But if we can avoid paying too much, that's the concept there. Right. And another portion of this is more focused on retirement. It's not outliving your money. Okay. Most people that I know don't want to work forever. I can think of probably a handful that do, my dad being one of them. He's a builder and developer in the valley of Virginia, so Central Virginia area. And every time I talk to him, I'm like, Dad, what are you doing? He's like, I'm not planning for retirement. I'm going to work forever. Okay, perfect. I'm not going to argue with you because you're my dad, but I don't think it's a great plan. So regardless, risk management. Again, I touched on this. It's checking boxes, essentially, making sure that you guys are all if you're in farming, it's very hands-on work, right? If you can't go out there and do that, if you can't do the manual labor, how does the income become generated? Right? We've got to be prepared for an illness or an injury, right? So we've got to protect against those two pieces. And then far right there's a bit morbid, it talks about dying too early. Right? No one wants to leave a scenario to their surviving spouses or family members that is not well planned. There's a story, I forget the origin of the story, but it was basically, the gist of it is, when you're looking to put a puzzle together, it's helpful to know where all the pieces are, right? So if you know, and you've worked with an advisor, you've got this insurance over here, you've got this savings over here, we know, okay, I can go to this document. This says exactly what I've got. I can pull all these pieces together and my family can feel confident about my financial situation in my departure. In terms of building up that safety net, the emergency fund, quote unquote, typically when we're sitting down with folks, we're looking at 3 to 6 months of your expenses saved up in cash on hand, easily accessible, right? Not in a CD that's locked up, more necessarily something that can be easily transferred. So if you've got a savings account, you can go on your Wells Fargo app and hit transfer over to your checking account. It needs to be simple like that. Beyond 6 months, any extra cash needs to be put to work. And it doesn't need to work hard. It just needs to work harder than the 0.02% that I'm getting from Wells Fargo. And I'll pick on Wells Fargo a lot tonight because if you don't know, that's who I bank with. So it's an easy reference point for me. But a lot of times when we look and talk to folks, that 6-month number, that might not be what makes them feel comfortable, right? They might say, well, I need above and beyond that because for me, it's like a safety blanket. I feel better about having X amount of dollars in my account. So we'll talk to them about that. We'll say, well, you can look at this mutual fund or this money market account. The risk is not really there, but yet you're going to get 10 times better return than you will from your savings account. Let's see, skipped a couple there. As far as paying down debt goes, one of the things that we're always looking at, and student loans aren't a huge piece, but credit cards, home equity lines of credit, things that are eating away at our net worth with super high interest payments or interest amounts, they just need to be taken care of. So part of the modeling that we do is looking to say, how can we eliminate this silly debt? Obviously, it's going to reduce the amount of overhead that you have, which is going to make you a little bit more comfortable from a month-to-month perspective. But also, once that's gone, our money can go somewhere else and work harder. And instead of paying 10 to 20% in interest, we can earn 10 to 20% interest. So that's a huge transition there. When we talk about protecting the income, the reason behind that is your most important asset is your ability to earn an income. Right? If you're not in the picture, where does the money come from? There's only 2 ways to produce an income: a person at work or money at work. You take either one of those out of the picture, the other one has to be there. Okay, so again, we're having conversations with folks to say, is the income protected? Is the money at work? All right, if we can check both of those boxes, it's a much simpler conversation. Kind of a scary statistic, and I don't mean to scare you guys. We'll get to the fun stuff, I promise. 1 in 4 employees will become disabled at least for 3 months during their working careers. So it's important to make sure that we've got the proper savings, we've got the proper insurances in place, that if we are unable to go out there and produce the income necessary to keep the household running, something's there to back us up. A lot of times folks will think about disability in terms of, Christopher Reeves, in the automatic chair. It doesn't have to be that serious. I like to tell this story because it blows my mind to this day that it happened. Excuse me. We paid 4 disability claims last year. One of them, the most bizarre one I've ever seen, was for OCD. Didn't know you could go on disability claim for that. but this person did. They had it so bad that they could not do the duties of their day-to-day work. So something to think about, right? It doesn't have to be, I broke a leg, I broke an arm. It's simple things like that, or some of these more common ones, heart attacks, strokes, cancers, back problems from the manual labor. All of those are relevant. Long-term care is something that we cover for a lot of folks in the self-employed world, mostly because of the deductibility, right? This is a serious thing to consider because as we age, this is the most likely event that we'll experience. Long-term care affects 70% of households in the US. Right? Typically about age 50, we start to take this type of product very seriously. Okay, it's very expensive. For the self-employed people, you can actually deduct the premiums that you're paying for this. Huge advantage there. So that's why that's part of the conversation. As far as providing for those you leave behind, part of our conversations are always, what do we want to make sure is taken care of? Right? Is there a lot of debt left over? Do we want to make sure that the kids can go to school or have money for a down payment for their first home? What kind of legacy do we want to leave? Things like that. All right, finally, on to the fun stuff. We can stop thinking about the depressing stuff. Building our wealth. All right, so again, the goal for all of our money is to have it work, right? Again, we want to make sure we've got 3 to 6 months of our expenses saved up. Every time I sit down with someone, that's the first piece we're looking at least getting you 1 month saved up to start, and then we're going to build to 3. Okay. We look at building money for college savings, if that's relevant. Some folks that I talk to these days, and I kind of agree, college education is becoming less and less relevant, mostly because of the cost, right? But people still want to discuss it. So if this is something anyone has questions about, I'm happy to field that. Retirement savings, finally getting to something good here. We want to talk about different tools, different vehicles that you can use. Some of you may have second jobs, second sources of income. You may have access to a 401k. That's going to be the biggest opportunity to save that you'll have. Some of you don't have that option. So we'll look at, what does an IRA look like for me? Can I open a Roth? Right? These are all really good savings vehicles specifically for retirement. The disadvantage to these is you set money aside, it has to stay there at least until 59 and a half, or you're going to get a 10% penalty for pulling money out. So that's why it's important to, when we think about saving in terms of timelines, right? We want anything within 2 years that we're looking to accomplish, we mostly want to keep it in cash. 2 to 10 years, we can look at some different strategies. 10 years to retirement, we definitely want to make sure that we're funding these kind of retirement accounts as much as we can. When we look at what are we investing in, what kind of accounts are we using, some key considerations here on the screen. What kind of risk are we willing to take? Right? A lot of folks that I work with in the self-employed world, they work really hard for their money. So when they set it aside for tomorrow, they don't want to see what they've contributed, their capital contributions going down. They want to see at least a steady return, something that might just keep pace with inflation, but they feel good about it because it's not going backwards, right? The other things we want to consider are taxes. Can I deduct contributions to this? Should I deduct contributions to this? When will I pull the money out? All of these things need to be taken into consideration. Asset allocation is kind of a buzzword in my field, but it actually makes up for about 90% of your investment success. Right? If we pick the right investments, we're invested in the appropriate asset classes, we can basically generate the returns appropriate for what you're looking for. Right? So if you're 20 years old, you really don't want a portfolio made up of mostly bonds. That doesn't make sense. If you're 60 years old, that probably makes sense. Right? So somewhere in the middle is where everybody else falls. making sure that we've got the appropriate blend of each of the asset classes. There's 9 of them that make up the stock market. And typically in the portfolios that we're building, you're going to own at least 2% of each of the 9. So it's not just picking one and running with it. The success comes from diversification. So when we think about accumulating wealth, here's what we want to talk about. I've talked about asset allocation. We want to talk about what happens if I outlive this money, right? I'm sure there's some folks on this call that may or may not see Social Security, right? We don't know kind of what that program looks like moving forward. It's been going bankrupt forever. So a lot of our responsibility is to build and grow our own wealth, and that's on us, right? The key to accumulating your wealth is to not just set it and forget it, right? It needs to be reviewed. I would say on average, the accounts that we see that are mismanaged haven't been looked at in about 10 years, right? And that's way too long. Most of the folks that we're working with, if we're not talking with them every 6 months, we're looking at their account every other year. And that's actually becoming a requirement by the IRS to say, hey, if you manage money for people, you have to talk to them on a regular basis. And I like that. That's one of the scenarios where the government's sticking their nose in a situation I think works out well. So wealth preservation and distribution. You guys are going to work really hard over the next 10, 15, 20 years. We've got to make sure the money that we're building and the wealth that we're growing is going to be there as long as you are. Okay. When we talk about pulling the money out, we need to make sure that we've got multiple different buckets to pull it from, right? Because if anyone's paid attention to the market in the last 2 weeks, go even further, the last 3 years, since I think COVID started 3 years ago, it's been kind of a blur. One thing we know is the markets are not consistently stable, right? So when the market's down 30% and we're trying to live off of our retirement savings, where do we pull money from? What options do we have? How can we make sure that I'm not selling out of a 401k position or an IRA position and losing the majority of my investment because it wasn't proper timing? Right, so that's what this slide is all about. It's utilizing all these different options of savings to make sure that in any given scenario, we're well prepared and well planned. Estate planning, this is a big part of it, right? And it's not creating trust, and that's part of it. But the most important thing in estate planning is just building a will, right? The last thing we want is someone or something that we don't want figuring out where our wealth goes, where our funds would go, right? We want to make sure that we decide who's the recipient and the beneficiary of those things. And creating a will, most of the time, the most common time to do that is when you get married or have a child, right? Those are the 2 big pieces. A couple other things you'll want to consider from an estate planning perspective are power of attorneys and medical directives. Who's going to make the call when you can't, right? Those are big pieces. And most, if you guys don't have an attorney that you work with, I can recommend as many as you want. I've got a couple good connections that are inexpensive and can help with some baseline estate planning at a very efficient cost. Last but not least is building the legacy, right? You guys work really hard. You probably don't do it just for yourself, right? There's some other motivation behind you, whether it's kids, nieces, nephews, whatever it may be, someone that you're looking to help build this for. So when we talk about building this up, there's a lot of thought given to, okay, where does this go beyond me? Kind of a commercial to wrap things up here. When we choose who we're working with as a financial planner, you've got to find someone that you trust. First and foremost, that's a big thing. likability is big in our business. There's not a lot that separates me from the guy next door, right? We all kind of offer similar stuff, and especially in the investment world, if they can get it, so can I. In the insurance world, it's a little more competitive. That's where my firm, Northwestern, really stands out, is they do a really good job of their money management and their overall financial strength, as you see the top 4 ratings in the industry that you can get among all of the rating agencies. So it's important to make sure that the money that you've got and the insurance coverage that you have is with a firm that you know is going to be there when you need it. So that was, again, I wanted to breeze through that tonight because I don't like to be scripted. I'd much rather hear you guys' questions, talk through, what we can do to help make sure that the financial planning side of building your business is something that's not quite as scary as it needs to be. Let's see, Joanna, anything you'd like me to cover before we go to questions?
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. That was super great. Lots of great stuff to think about. Not too scary. A little bit scary, but not too scary.
A little scary.
Do you think, I think so most of the folks in the group tonight are really just getting started and, kind of more at the potentially taking on debt stage of things than building wealth stage of things. So do you think you could speak to that and how you can build that into a financial plan?
Yeah. What's the typical structure? How do we typically go about getting those debt pieces built in? Is it through lines of credit or?
Well, we've talked about last week we spoke to or 2 weeks ago we had somebody speak who is a kind of less traditional, like a non-traditional small loan lender. A lot of lenders, a lot of loans available to folks here are through the USDA, so they're very low interest. But I guess also just like not necessarily just debt, but just outlaying of investing, right? Investing in our businesses instead of taking out of them.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's often a necessary expense, right? And we see this not just in your world, but in the professional world as well. I mean, professional by law, medical, right? Those folks, they have to go 8 years worth of higher education. They come out with sometimes $200,000 or more in student debt. So the ability to go and get a loan through the USDA is an investment in yourself and your business. So we never look at that as negative debt, and especially if you're getting it at a low interest rate, it's just a part of building the business, right? And I'm assuming most of the time these are longer term loans, right, Joanna?
Sometimes a lot of them are kind of medium term, but
Okay.
Yeah, certainly if it's like for land purchase, it would be like a mortgage.
Yeah, I think a lot of times when you're initially looking to get that loan, one of the things that a bank's going to require is collateral of some sort. And you've got the farm, you've got the land, you've got other places you can go to. So a lot of times there, in my world, you can leverage things like life insurance, or you can leverage your investment accounts. You can say, hey, I want to pledge these as collateral. So part of building and growing is taking on that debt picture. So.
Great. And another thing, I guess, just to kind of frame it is maybe you can speak to like, because I think some people have asked about like, how much should I invest, and we've tried to provide folks with resources on like startup costs and estimating those and building a budget. But maybe if you, from your professional point of view, can offer some like cautionary tales or just, a kind of general warnings of like, this is a good, you don't want to get past X threshold investing in a new business?
Yeah, I think, keeping most of your debt to where the payment is less than 35% of what your gross income is an important number, right? And a lot of people will say 35% of net income. I prefer gross because you've got a business that's going to grow over time. It's going to become more and more productive. It's going to produce more income for you, right? So I think giving that gross versus net number is more attractive. Does that answer your question or not?
Yeah, in terms of debt, that's super helpful, but I guess just taking debt out of the picture, just, whether it's, how much of your own money you might want or
How much
not
did you
want to
save?
invest
Yeah.
to a
Okay.
new business.
So back in the day, you could get away with 15%, right? Because back in the day, you could rely on larger Social Security numbers. You could rely on pensions. Self-employed people can't do the pension piece. You can't rely on that, at least. So nowadays, when we do the math, we look at the numbers, you should be working towards saving 20% of your income. Okay, now that could be a big number, right? But that financial planning is every bit of a marathon, right? So one year we could be building up to 10%. And then the next year, okay, can we get to 12 and a half? And then the next year, 15, and then eventually we'll get to 20. But $50 saved today is going to work a heck of a lot harder than $50 saved 3 years from now.
Great, well, thank you. I'm going to read out loud some questions from the chat, just in case anyone isn't in front of their computer. So Ben asked, how do you factor in real estate / land in terms of asset allocation and financial planning?
So actually, real estate is one of the asset classes that makes up the 9 asset classes of the stock market. In a technical sense, it means real estate investment trusts, but when we work with folks that are in your shoes, it actually means physical real estate, right? And that's probably going to be one of the largest pieces that makes up your overall net worth, right? So depending on what your goal is for that real estate is ultimately what determines how do we view this as part of our overall portfolio. Because if you're going to look to build this up and sell it, then it's viewed completely different from building it up and passing it on to generations.
Great. And the next question is, can you assist with structuring a trust to place the land under?
Me personally, we don't have those kind of resources, but those in the law world will. Again, I've got attorneys that I'm happy to make introductions to. Trusts are probably one of my favorite ways to make sure that wealth is passed on the way you want it to pass on. Right, a will is great, but a trust is even better. So if Victoria, if you want some introductions there, feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to give you my email or my cell, and we can get you connected with the right people there.
Awesome. Cassandra wants to know, are you an independent / fiduciary planner or commissioned? And what are the pros or cons of each for a small business owner?
Yeah, that's a great question. Fortunately, in 2018, the Department of Labor introduced a new law where anyone who holds a securities license technically has to be a fiduciary, meaning you have to act in the best interest of the person you're on the other side of the table from. So we kind of check a few boxes there. We are fiduciaries, but we have 2 business models where you can either pay us a fee to plan for you, which puts us on your payroll. A lot of folks starting out don't do that, right? The other option is, yes, we do have the commission route, which involves no fees, right? So in the insurance and investment world, it's based off of what particular tools or products we're putting into place. I'll tell you the recommendations between the two are pretty much identical though, because I'm from a small town, and you don't want to screw over anyone, for lack of better terms, or you're not going to have a business tomorrow. So
that makes sense for sure. Chelsea asks, what sort of jargon should we look out for when trying to get loans? It seems like there are some predatory practices in the financial world. I've heard that when we have debt, we should work on paying that off before we start saving. Does this mentality apply to having a lot of student debt too? And she said, sorry if you address this, but she was dealing with a puppy issue. After that, she had a few more questions, but I'll start with that. So
okay.
Jargon to look out for, and whether we should be paying off debt before we start saving, and does this apply to student debt?
Yeah, I think fortunately, these days we don't have to be as cautious as you used to in terms of jargon, right? There's so much regulation now in my world and in the world of those that are doing small business loans or just loaning in general. Personally, I like being in front of my banker, right? So I don't do a ton of business with online loan sources. I prefer that face-to-face conversation, because then I can read that person. Right? I don't have to worry about what kind of language is hidden in this contract. But I do think there's a lot of regulation now that keeps it from being quite as questionable to deal with when you're going to get secure some sort of loan or debt obligation. Was there?
The next question was about paying down debt versus saving.
Yeah. So you look at those combined, right? Because if your debt interest rate is 3%, or even a lot of student loans that we're seeing, the average is about 6% now. That's not terrible, right? And if you can take and make that payment over time, it's not the worst thing, right? Where else can you go and get 4 to 6% interest on $50,000 to $100,000? It's kind of hard, right? So paying that is not the worst thing, especially when it hasn't been the case so far for 2022. I think the market's down 11% or something like that to date. But if you can take the same money or something close to what you're paying towards your debt obligations and get it in the market, and on average earn 9 or 10%, then you're better off to say, okay, let's put some of this money to work while I'm maintaining my debt obligations.
Great. And the second piece of that is, as a financial planner, what do you think is a healthy amount of correspondence to have with a client for someone who's in the planning stages of a business? Is it smart to have a financial advisor, or should we wait until we've already started the business to have one?
Typically, the best rule of thumb is kind of like when's the best time to start saving? Well, as soon as you think about it, right? So if you're thinking, well, could I use an independent kind of second opinion for this? Now may be a good time to connect with someone to see, am I thinking the right way? I would steer you more towards someone who doesn't charge a fee for that kind of conversation, right? So in our business, there's two schools of thought, and fortunately we kind of do both, where you can have that kind of conversation where you have to pay to be part of what we're doing, or hey, let's work together for the long run here, and you don't owe any fees or commissions up front. So.
That's good to know. Carlos asks, what is your view on online savings accounts? They seem to get slightly better returns than traditional savings accounts, but is it essentially the same thing as just keeping cash on hand?
I like some of the online savings accounts. I know I get solicited for Chase, and I think it's Marcus by Goldman Sachs. They're good, right? They're going to give you 1.5% versus the maybe max 0.05 that you can get from the bank that you're working with, right? But they're going to require something, right? Whether it's a regular direct deposit or a transfer each month or something like that. So you just got to be careful, read the fine print there to make sure that there's no fees, no expenses, no mandatory transfers or anything like that. But a lot of times those are really good places to put money. Again, I would make sure that there's a direct line of communication between the account that you use regularly as an operating account and that account, so that if you need those monies today, they can be transferred quickly.
Great. Well, that's all of the Zoom chat questions that have come in so far. If anybody wants to just ask a question, you can feel free to unmute yourself. Or you can also still just put a question in the chat. Something I was thinking about was, Jacob, when you said when you were talking about interest or paying down debt with low interest, what about, I mean, I think I know the answer to this, but if it's credit card debt, that's something you want to be paying down before you're saving, right?
Yeah, those are typically, first thing that we're attacking really before we do anything else. And if it is a credit card, there's so many companies out there that do balance transfers. So the first thing we're doing is looking to see, can you get a balance transfer, go to a 0% for, most of them do 12 to 18 months. And then we're going to attack the heck out of payments to those to take advantage of that 0% interest. But a lot of times on average, you'll see 16 to 18% for credit cards. And in a normal world pre-COVID, that wasn't exactly an easy return to get in the stock market. So in comparison, your money's better spent to eliminate that debt than it is to try to save and get, somewhere in the 6 to 8% returns that we may see this year.
Okay, let's see. Bernadette asks, is there a certain amount or percent that you recommend people have in liquid savings?
Yeah, so that one, there's obviously the technical side and then personal preference, right? So again, minimum 3 months, maximum 6 months of expenses. If that number is not comfortable for you, there's another number that it may be higher. I tend to not let our clients tell us that a lower number is more comfortable for them, just because of our experience and what we've seen. We just don't want our cash not working hard enough, right? So again, even if we keep 3 to 6 months of expenses directly in our savings account, but we need more cash than that to feel good about what we've got going on, then let's look to leverage some of maybe the fixed income portion of the stock market, where we can see less volatility, but maybe a little bit better return than what we're getting from our savings account.
Great. Well, does anybody else have any questions? Jennifer asked, can you speak about differences and different pros or cons of whole and term life insurance and their different purposes, and how returns on whole life insurance compares to other types of investments like brokerage accounts?
Yeah. So in the insurance world, there's, for those of you that don't know, there's essentially 2 types of life insurance. There's term and there's whole life. And the easiest comparison is to think about it as renting a home versus owning a home, right? And term is renting your home. You're making your monthly payments. When you move out, you get nothing. Most of the time, you can get a level premium term policy for 20 or 30 years. Most people outlive those. An interesting statistic is less than 4% of term life insurance policies ever pay a death benefit. Huge moneymaker for the insurance companies, but they're super, super inexpensive. Okay, so that's the biggest advantage, especially when you're starting out, is you can secure a really sizable policy for a low monthly premium. Okay. Now, the alternative is the whole life, right? So that's owning a home. We're building some equity there. Historically, again, when regulation wasn't a thing, these policies got a bad name because they were implemented by companies that are no longer around. So they were sold as an investment, which is actually illegal. You're not supposed to do that. They were mismarketed early on, so they got a bad name. I'm a fan of the whole life insurance policies, especially for business owners, because they can be pledged as collateral for your next loan. They can be a source of emergency fund savings. They can be a source of supplemental retirement. They are beneficial for that. When you're looking at life insurance, that's where it becomes important to make sure that you're with the right companies. There's, I think, 1,600 insurance companies that offer life insurance in the US, which is a crazy number. You probably only hear about maybe 15 of them. 7 of those companies are mutual companies right now, meaning they don't answer to stockholders, right? So there's stock companies and there's mutuals companies. Mutual companies, when they make money, they return it to the policyholder. There's no middleman, there's no stockholder that takes a portion of that. With the stock companies, obviously, any earnings have to go through the stockholders and then to the policyholder. So you want to make sure if you're going to own some whole life insurance that it's through a mutual company. And again, that's a very small crowd, but those companies tend to offer the best return on your money. Now, in terms of comparing them to investments, they really shouldn't be compared. They should be looked at as kind of a team, the two working together, right? Because with Northwestern, the dividend return is 5%, right? So, and that's a fixed rate. There's no market volatility to that. That's attractive in years like what we're experiencing so far. But last year, when you saw certain funds that were returning 60 and 70%, that doesn't compare. Right now, last year was an outlier, and hopefully it doesn't happen again anytime soon, because that means something went wildly wrong. But you know, it should be viewed as the two working together. And you know, you want to make sure that a portion of the wealth that you're building is off the roller coaster. And in my opinion, there's no better place to put cash that you don't need today than through something that's going to yield you 5% versus your alternatives being a CD or a savings account. So hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Thank you. Did anyone else have any other questions?
Hello, I have a question. This is Victoria again.
Hey, Victoria, go ahead.
So I was just wondering, I put the question in directly to to Jacob, but he may not have seen it. I was just wondering about using a trust, the insurance on a trust, as a source of as a loan. Like, can he explain that process?
Let's see if I can find your question. Okay, I got it. Yeah, so I think, Victoria, what you're asking is, and interestingly enough, this is how the Rockefellers built their wealth, was through creating trusts, funding those trusts with whole life insurance policies. But the difference between us and the Rockefellers is several $1 billion, unfortunately. So what it takes in order to be able to do that, it tends to be a higher level of cash flow, right? And a higher commitment to a policy of that structure. Now, you can either do one of two things. You can give it time or you can give it money, right? And that will create what would be needed to make building that trust to where it would be a place where you could go and borrow and have it be equitable for, creating business loans or things of the sort. But at a high level, that's exactly what the Rockefellers did. Is they created a family trust, funded it with life insurance policies, and there's a reason that the Rockefeller family is still worth several $billion because they did it right. And I read a book recently that compared the Rockefellers and the Carnegies. The Carnegies have almost spent every single dollar that they ever made. The last living person from that family right now is Anderson Cooper. Okay, and the Rockefellers are still living off of about $200 billion. So they're big time, and like I said, it takes a good bit of time or a good bit of resources to create a trust funded with life insurance that can do that level of planning. Not sure if that answers your question. She says, how much money does it take? Most of the time you can create something that could be equitable in the early years. Don't hold me to it, but maybe 10 grand a year would get you something that would create something like that, where you could generate a piece of collateral that can be loaned out and used for those advantages.
Thank you.
That's probably the minimum amount.
Jamaica asked, when you talk about stock investments, do you recommend a certain type of stock or fund, or does it depend on individual goals?
Yeah, it's individually focused, but also personally, I like versus individual stocks. I would prefer something like an ETF or a mutual fund. Getting some sort of active management in there is always helpful, especially in times like this, where, if you had picked Facebook or Meta, whatever they call themselves now, instead of being able to have some sort of management or diversification in that account, you're ultimately just riding their 30% downfall. Right, versus having a mutual fund or an ETF that's spread out a little bit, that 30% downfall doesn't hurt as bad because it's just a portion of what makes up what you're investing in. Now, it also works the alternative route, to where if someone sees a 30% growth on one account, it's not quite as big as if all your eggs were in that basket, but it's safer from the risk side of it.
So Ben asks, most of the strategies we've discussed seem to apply to individual financial planning. Do the same principles apply to business financial planning? For example, less than 35% debt asset allocation if we have surplus income or cash.
The main difference between personal planning and business planning is just the marketability of the business. Right, you have the opportunity to grow something, put money back into something that an individual that's an employee does not. Right, so it's considered a little bit differently, but you still want to be doing most of the things that an individual planner would want to do. Right, because you want to think about them as one, but also separate them. Right, because the business is you, but the business is not going to be you forever. Right, eventually you're going to want to step back, and you're going to want to have planned appropriately for your individual retirement, not just the businesses. But yes, pretty much the general concepts kind of remain the same.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And what are your views on life cycle funds with a targeted retirement date?
That's a good question, Ben. They're, I think they're great when you're starting out, right? When we work with folks that are just getting started, they're trying to build the muscle of savings. I think it allows you to set an account up that you don't have to think about. Most of the time, what we're doing once those accounts reach $5,000, we're looking to get them out of there pretty quickly. And the reason behind that is those lifestyle funds or target date funds, they go by a couple different names. They hold a little bit too much fixed income early on, so their returns tend to lag, usually by at least 2 to 3% in comparison to what you could get by taking a similar amount of risk.
Shanika asks, if we have questions later on, is it okay to reach out to you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll make sure. I don't know how you want to do it, Joanna, but they can have my cell, email, whatever's needed to help me be a resource.
Awesome. That's very generous of you. Thank you. Did anyone else have any other questions for Jacob? All right. Well, I think we'll let you go then. And if you do have any, it seems like we can definitely reach out to Jacob if we do end up with any other questions. So thank you so much for sharing all of that helpful stuff.
Yeah, thank you guys.
All right. And so, yeah, I went through all of the assignments on Google Classroom, and I didn't see questions that popped out at me the same way that that folks had questions last time. But I did want to just open it up in case folks had some more general questions about the classroom material or about the program so far.
Surprise, surprise. I have a question. This is Ben.
Sure, go for it.
A couple of the videos seemed to like cover some interesting material and then be at the end of the video be transitioning into something that looked like it would actually be quite interesting to continue. And I tried to find the full links on YouTube on my own, but I don't know if you all might have those on hand. There was one on, I think, like weed control techniques for organic farmers, and I'm blanking on the other one that I saw.
Sure.
Was it the one about different tools that they're using? Because I liked that one too. And I also couldn't find it.
I will follow up with Amy Rose about that. She's the one who put the most of the resources together. So
I think they were both from Vermont or University of Vermont, maybe.
okay, I'll check that out.
Thank you.
Sure. Another resource that I was thinking about adding to the classroom for this week was a recording that of a conversation that the former program director hosted last year that was about crop planning, that in a way that was very very detailed and very like step-by-step, just because I thought that I didn't think we had anything quite that detailed yet. Is that something that folks would be interested in having access to? Okay. Yeah, it's very like, it walks you through it very well. So I'm just gonna make a note to myself.
Can I ask a detailed question about like bed prep and planning?
Sure.
Okay, so I want to do like 4,000 square feet of new planting bed, and I don't want to rip up everything. So I'm trying to figure out, I guess, how to do it. Like I'm gonna have to buy compost, I'm gonna have to buy soil because I'm starting from scratch on grass, and I don't know, it's overwhelming. I don't know the best way to go about it. Like, I have my bed sizes, I have the area I want to do, but I just don't know how much material and like technique. Am I just going to dump dirt and compost on top of grass?
Well, I would advise against that because the grass
Yeah,
will take it over.
just grow through it. Exactly.
Does anybody have experience they want to share of turning a lawn into a garden bed?
But not just like a lawn, because I've done that. Like, I'm looking for like productive, like I'm not trying to grow flowers, I'm trying to grow like everything. So just like, how do you start from scratch in just a few months without tilling?
Actually,
So for me, this is Kamisha. One of the first things that I'm doing is I'm working with the small farms outreach coordinator. In my area is Tracy Porter. So he's gonna like come out, check everything out, and I know what I want to do, but what I'm looking for from him is to tell me how much of what I want to do I can actually do. I'm somewhat like the area I'm on now, it'll be my second year growing from it. So what I did last year, I started like later in the spring. So I kind of just put everything straight into the ground. This year, the first thing I'm doing, because you're like, what is the first step? I'm tarping the area that I'm starting with. So tarping that to basically kill everything under it, because we're starting to get like more sun in the area I'm growing. From there, I mean, you're right, you will need like the compost and all that stuff. So I'm kind of the same thing. I'm not doing any tilling or anything like that. I have seen some people where they'll till at least the first go round, and then after that, they won't do any tilling, but I'm trying to do as least as possible. So that's what I have as far as like my very first step is what I'm doing to get ready for everything.
I think that's what I'm struggling with. Like, am I being unrealistic by saying I'm not going to till anything? I think that's my biggest question.
Yeah, I mean, tillage is not a 4-letter word. You know, it's something that we need to use in a smart, it's a tool in our toolkit, and it's something we need to use in a smart way. And some people especially on a smaller scale, do go after a strict no-till practice. But I think for a lot of people, it's most realistic to at least do some tillage to break new ground.
Okay.
But also thank you, Kamisha, for sharing your experience. That's super helpful. And yeah, I mean, in terms of importing soil, you know, you definitely want to test your soil, because you could, for all you know, you have great soil right there. So you know, don't spend money on something that you already have.
Yeah, I did test my soil. My soil seems fine. And I did have my like local agent come out and talk to me about growing. What do I want to grow? She wasn't very helpful. I don't think she liked me very much. But like, everything looks fine. I don't know. I can't wrap my head around all of this space and not turning or ripping out this grass. And I feel like just doing layering method and it just won't work. So don't be afraid of tilling, it sounds like.
And you could always do an experiment. You know, you could always try not tilling on a small patch and tilling on another and see which one works better, and, you know, then do more of that next year.
Okay, thank you.
And just so folks know, the tarps that we were talking about are called silage tarps. And those are available. You want to make sure you get those because they don't break down in the sun. If you use just other types of plastic, they can just get damaged by UV rays and just fall apart. So they're often available for purchase at like feed stores, because that's how they are used for silage. So they're usually quite large. So I know some folks, like in Baltimore near where I live, folks will go in on they'll buy a larger one and cut it up and split the cost of it so that, you know, you don't have to have this ginormous honking thing. It's quite heavy as well. It's like the same material as a pool cover, if you've ever used one of those. So it's pretty heavy duty. Looks like Farmer's Friend has some good tarps as well, says Victoria. Does anyone want to have experience using cardboard to kill grass? Or cardboard mulching?
Hey, this is Christy. I have done, can you hear me?
Yes.
I've done cardboard, and I don't know if I would recommend it because grass and weeds were able to grow through it still. But I think after the second year they stopped, so it might just take a longer time. But it was for a small area, and it's super easy to do, but for a large area, I don't know if it would work. You need a lot of cardboard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've tried board too, and I don't know if we're a great example because I don't know how consistent we were with like keeping up weeding it. But we had to do like 2 or 3 rounds of cardboard before it really stopped.
This is Cassandra. I was going to mention that if you're going to till, you probably want to be familiar with what weeds are in that area, because from what I've seen watching some like YouTube market gardeners, there's some weeds that are like, I guess they grow like horizontally. I think they're called like rhizome weeds. And if you till and cut those up, you're like multiplying them times a million. And so they could become really noxious.
I also just put in the chat a method of bed prep called double digging with a link to a video. That's another way of building beds for the first time. Very, very labor intensive, but you know, in a smaller space. Could be something to look at.
Hi, I have 2 questions. This is
Yeah.
Mashan. The first question is about marketing. So does anyone have any experience, doesn't mind sharing like some of the ways that they started to figure out what are some of the, like one, like identifying your customers based on like the desire in your area, and I guess also a little bit part of it, like just what you personally want to grow as well. And then the second question is like, after you've identified your customers and that desired crop selection, any resources that you guys have found for yield and like pest management for your like desired set of crops that you chose. Because I saw like there was that resource for the production plan where they like created the spreadsheet where they cataloged like every crop they had or every animal they had on the farm. And so like to do that, I imagine that you need to say, okay, I want X amount of profit, and like this crop like costs X amount per pound or whatever unit you're using. So I need to plant X amount of this crop to get that desired amount, in order to create like a detailed spreadsheet like that. So I was wondering if anybody had any experience or tips for that.
I have something. This is Misha again. I have something for the first part, not the second part, because I'm still trying to figure out how to calculate those yields and things. I have so many seeds right now. And I'm like, do I just plant them all? I don't know yet. So I'm figuring that part out. But as far as like the market and things, marketing itself, I know I'm planning on being at the farmer's market. So, I mean, that's just marketing while you're selling. As far as finding customers, I'm going around 2 restaurants in my area. I happen to be starting with some friends that I have locally who do catering, like vegan and vegetarian. So I'm getting with them to find out if I can be a supplier for them. And then I'm checking with other restaurants just to see who they're getting their stuff from. And, you know, if they're looking for somebody that might be closer, who's able to offer like that fresh produce and things. I know I'm not doing CSA this year. I want to get everything good to go before I go that far. And then, you know, if you are doing like an urban farming type thing, the people right around you, like in your neighborhood, I know that was a suggestion that I got, to just put up a sign, you know, kind of like a little vegetable stand. I decided that's gonna be my daughter's job, but yeah, just sell to the people who are coming down the street. They'll see the sign and I really believe they will come. So that's what I have for that.
Thank you.
I can help with any of the marketing stuff as well. I spent years in advertising agencies and marketing agencies, and I did analytics installations for large corporations. But most searches start online, unfortunately. So if you're trying to figure out how to differentiate yourself, see what people aren't doing in your area and start doing keyword researches. Research stuff in Google, see what people are doing online. Start looking at the types of searches that people are doing, and then look at the predictive search. The predictive search is what kind of comes up in Google when you start to type in keywords, certain keywords, and then it'll sort of drop down and give you a list of things that other people have searched over time. And so you can start to try to get an idea of what people are doing in your area and what people are searching for that way. And then there are other keyword research tools that I can point you in the direction of as well.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I guess like one thing that makes me think of as a follow-up is like, what's the balance, if there's any, between what the market has dictated, like what you found people want, versus what you personally want to do. Like an example is like, if you want to start an aviary and have like bees and, you know, try to sell honey, but there's no market for that in your area, that's not good business. But that might be something you still want to personally do. So I was has anybody like ever encountered that, where you like basically what's profitable versus what's pleasurable, I guess?
Like if you use like a keyword research tool, like one of Google's keyword research tools, you can see how many people are searching things in your area, and you can actually get real-time stats on it and the numbers of people that might be searching that particular thing. And you can also compare what people are searching for to what's being offered in your area. Like you could potentially want to sell honey in your area, but if everyone else is selling honey in your area, that's not going to be very profitable because you have too much competition. So you might want to find whatever the differentiator is, whatever is a different kind of honey, or something where it's more of a niche search that people are looking for, or a different type of product or a niche product that isn't being offered quite as readily as everyone else is offering.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, and I would also say, thank you, Lori, that is super helpful. And yeah, any keyword research tools that you could share would be awesome. If you put them in the chat, I can send them out to folks. And I'm going to make sure to save the chat this time as well, because it seems like there's lots of good stuff in there this week. But something I was going to say about figuring out what you can make money doing and what is more pleasurable, you know, hopefully sometimes at least there's a Venn diagram where the two things overlap. But I think a lot of it is also trial and error, you know, because sometimes you might think that in either direction, you know, like something that you think might be a total bust, if you keep good records, you could actually see that you do have a good, you know, profit margin on it. And same, you know, you might start doing something that, you know, like seems really fun. Like I feel like this happens fairly often with like people doing laying hens, you know, where it's like, oh, having eggs is so fun, like eggs is great. And then once they scale it up, it gets to a point where it's like, oh my God, I'm washing eggs forever. This isn't fun anymore. So yeah, I think you do kind of figure it out as you go. There's also like whether you end up being good at it or not. Like, you know, we have something we on my farm wanted to grow for a long time was sweet corn, like organic sweet corn, which is, there's some farms who do it, and when they do it, they do, you know, they have like this method that they've been doing for a long time. And like we went to workshops about it, every year we tried for, this is like my husband's like passion project, because he just thought it would be so cool and so delicious. But every year something different went wrong, and we never it never came together money making wise. So yeah, there's that factor too. You got to figure out what you're good at producing also. It looks like Ben has his hand up.
Yeah, I actually kind of had a question a little bit building off the sweet corn example. And in terms of both sort of market research and what your region or outlets will sustain in terms of price, but then also like how do you factor that side of it in terms of sort of like the price support in your market, and are there any resources to find some of that information other than just going around and being observant versus, you know, calculating a price based on all of your inputs, including time and labor and all of that? Like, how do you think about that calculus?
I can speak to that, and anyone else is welcome to chime in. I mean, I would say generally you got to start with the former. Like if you are selling at a farmer's market and you're charging twice as much for a similar product as somebody else, then that's probably not gonna come together. That's not to say if you want to be charging rock bottom prices, because that's not gonna work for you or any of the other growers at the market either. I think I'm not sure what sort of crop costing resources have come up on the Google Classroom yet, but there are some good tools out there, like Richard Wiswall in his book that's called The Organic Farmer's Business Handbook. He has some good enterprise budgeting tools. So yeah, I'll make sure that I think we're going to get more into that as the classroom goes on, but if not, I will double check and direct some folks to that. Did anybody else want to speak to that question?
Yes, I did. I know it's like beating the nail a couple of times, repeating it, but you really do have to scope your market and your competition. And it's not even just looking at your competition. Look at people that are doing it what you want, like a desired company or a desired farmer, and they're doing the things that you think or deem that is right, and kind of scale out, like, do they have a website? What is their website built off of? How do they do their marketing? How did you see their marketing? What did you like about it? Was it the color? Was it the font? Were they friendly? You have to kind of like scope out what's drawing their customers to them. And then I do like a spreadsheet, and I have like each company, each person, what I like, what I dislike. And then I have like another spreadsheet for companies that I think I can do better than, and what it is that I can offer that they do not offer. And that seems to work.
Awesome. Yeah, and building on that as well, it has so much to do with where you're trying to sell. I mean, geographically, like, I'm sure, for example, like we are selling CSA shares in DC for the first time this year, and we're raising our prices on those shares both because we are traveling farther to deliver them, and because our fellow farmer friends in some cases who are also selling CSA shares in that region charge higher prices, so we don't want to undercut them. Anyone else have anything to add about figuring out prices? It's a big topic, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more. as we go. Carlos, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had two questions. The first one was if you or if others could explain kind of how to incorporate cover crops into your crop planning. Like what space is it typically like dedicated to cover crops, and do they offer benefits other than, you know, biological benefits like building the soil? Like, do you actually try to sell those? So yeah, just wanted to learn more about that.
I'm looking to see if we are talking more about cover crops. It will probably come up more, but yeah, I mean, you can definitely, I think actually next week when Lisa Garfield from the Million Acre Challenge is going to talk a lot about soils. So I think she is going to give us a really in-depth look at cover crops and the important role that they play in soils. I think that, and it depends on the size of your growing space. I think they are a really great way to add organic matter into your soil in a way that's often less expensive than buying compost and adding it to your soil. You want to be careful that they're that you can terminate them, aka kill them, at the scale that you are at with the tools that you have. For example, something like rye or vetch. Ooh, sorry, there's a stink bug on my computer, Chris. That's something, those can be really hard to kill and they can come back year after year. So, and even if they don't, just the initial like mat of plant is really intense and strong. So it can be hard to turn over unless you are at a mechanical scale. So those are some considerations when you're in a smaller space. Yeah, what was the second part of your question about cover crops? I'm sorry.
If like they have other benefits other than biological benefits, like do you sell cover crops?
Right. Yeah, so I know like some people grow Austrian winter peas as a winter cover crop, and that's something that you can harvest pea shoots from in the spring. So there's things like that. You know, on my farm, we grow oats as a cover crop, and then we actually have a small combine that we use to harvest them and sell them as rolled oats. So there are things out there. I'd say they're pretty, you know, grain farming is like a whole huge different ball game, and I think unless you're at a pretty large scale, it's hard to turn a profit at a pretty large and mechanized scale. But yeah, the pea shoot thing is the main example that comes to mind for me. Does anybody else have experience with cover crops or selling cover crops? Yeah, I don't know of any that would have. I know sometimes I see like crimson clover in floral arrangements. So that's another one you could use in that way.
Cool. And then the other question I had was it was based off of the high tunnel video for this week. So they were talking about how important it is to manage pests and diseases. So I was wondering if anyone knew of any ways to manage pests and diseases organically without applying like insecticides.
So those are like the two biggest topics in farming, I would say, or the biggest three is pests, disease, and weeds. So so yeah, I think we're gonna talk a lot more about all of those because those are just like all really, really big. For pests, I mean, I'll give you like a big one for each three of those. Okay, so for pests, a big thing in organic practices is using a physical barrier instead of a chemical to kill the pest. So row cover, some people call it remay. That's huge. Disease, I think managing your water, so making sure the plant isn't getting too much or too little water, which can be a big challenge. And weeds is about timing. So figuring out ways to either get ahead of the weeds. Well, yeah, you always want to be ahead of the weeds, not behind the weeds, and get them before they have gone to seed so that you don't keep building up more weed seeds in your soil. But anyway, those are just like really big, quick and dirty overviews on all three of those things, and we will talk more about them for sure.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah. Lori, go ahead.
I was just wondering if you utilize companion planting.
Me personally, on my farm?
Yeah.
No. I think that it gets talked about a lot in gardening and maybe in permaculture as well, but on my farm scale, it's not something we think about. I think on a smaller, more intensive piece of land, maybe it's something we would think about more. I mean, I know from a space saving perspective, people talk about it more as interplanting as opposed to companion planting. So for example, like having a bed, especially in high tunnels, I think you'll see it. So in a high tunnel, you could have like a bed that in the very middle, there's a row of tomatoes. And while those tomatoes are still quite small, on either side, there'll be a couple of rows of carrots because those are going to be out of the way and harvested by the time that the tomato plant gets pretty big. So, or I see people, I know like some farmers plant scallions in little rows in between heads of lettuce just to maximize space. I think because space is not really an issue for us, it's not something we focus on as much, and because we're at a mechanical cultivation scale, it can make it kind of tricky for a tractor to get in between everything. So yeah, it's not something we do, but I don't know, I'm sure lots of other folks have more experience with it than I do, if anyone wants to chime in. Yeah, feel free to unmute. Oh,
Hey, Ben.
What's that, Joe?
No, I was just saying, go ahead, Ben. He had a hand raised.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I guess there's no big companion planters out there. I mean, I know there's sorry, Ben, just to wrap that up. There's a book called, I think it's like Carrots Love Tomatoes or something like that. But
I have a Flowers Love Vegetables book. Maybe it's that one.
Maybe that's it. Yeah. So there's definitely stuff out there, but I guess this group's not big on it. Sorry, so Ben, go ahead.
I wondered if you might be able to talk a little bit about nutrient management planning. The materials for this week were helpful in sort of the broader conceptual thinking of it, but I remember from the actual conference, I can't remember which session it was, but you had to have a formal nutrient management plan filed to qualify for certain programs. Could you talk a little bit about sort of that actual formal process and what all goes into getting started and developing and submitting that?
I can speak to it a little bit, but I think we should we should talk to Lisa about it next week, because I don't know as much about it as I'm sure she does. The formal, I can speak to the bureaucracy piece of it a little bit, which is that in Maryland, the way that you can get one for free from an extension person, or I can't remember if it actually goes through extension or Maryland Department of Agriculture, but or you can pay to have somebody write one for you, or you can become certified to write it for yourself. The way that it works right now, I don't find it to be a particularly helpful tool for small vegetable farmers. I think it is a helpful tool for people growing on a ton of acres, and maybe, making sure that they aren't polluting the bay horribly. But I don't think the end product that you get with your nutrient management plan is necessarily the best resource. That being said, nutrient management as a tool is really important. So I think we can definitely talk to Lisa next week about nutrient management as a broader practice, and also the bureaucracy side of it. Sure. Shanika asked about the 4-part series with Julia Shanks starting tomorrow. I actually do not know a ton about it, but I can say that I have been to presentations that Julia has given in the past, and I have found them extremely useful and helpful. She especially is excellent at talking about QuickBooks in a way that it makes it seem less scary. And I think she's going to be speaking more broadly about financial planning and business planning. But if you also want to ask her any QuickBooks questions, she is the one. It is available for all 3 levels. So I think, some of the stuff might be a little more advanced, but I think that the worst thing that happens is that you just have to ask a few more questions. So I think if you can go, they will be recorded, so you'll be able to watch them later. And we don't have any plans to talk about Three Sisters planting, but if anyone has any resources about that, I can look for something to add. Oh boy, my whole screen just went black. Okay, I guess I'm not going to write a note about it because it's making my whole computer shut down, but I will try to remember to include that in our follow-up. Were there any other questions that folks had? All right, well, it seems like we are wrapping up in that case. Thank you guys for joining this evening. I know this was like another pretty business focused, less production focused conversation that we had tonight. And Jacob definitely comes from a non-farm space, at least in his business. But yeah, so I think it can be harder to kind of wrap your head around it when you're thinking about starting a farm business, but there are very good nuggets in there, and I think I hope it was helpful. It sounds like Amy Rose did a presentation on some growing stuff, so we'll make sure to include that in the follow-up. So yeah, thank you everyone. I'll leave the Zoom open for a second in case anyone wants to touch base, and yeah, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
I have a question about the field days.
Sure.
So 2 questions. One, is there limited space or is it open to like if everybody in level 1 wants to go to that field day, are they all able to go to it?
That is a good question. I think it depends on the field day, is my understanding.